Matt Goodwin already discussed the basic features of the ISO attachment. I'm not really that good at discussing the basic features. I'm more the guy that likes to try to break shit and tear it down. So I'm going to tell you what it's actually used for and why I decided to have a rack built the way that this is built. Because the one question I've had since we posted this is, why do we have this space here in the first place? The reason for this is, back in high school, which I'll just say back in the day, most of the racks that I trained with were actually called isometric racks. And all the rack was what you see here, but it was a round pipe with actually smaller room in between. The purpose of the rack wasn't so much to squat inside of. You did all the squats outside and all the benches outside. The purpose of the rack was mainly to do isometric work, what's called quasi-isometric work, static to dynamic work, and other things which I'm going to show really quick. I'm not going to go through every single thing. What I wanted to do was to take that old school isometric rack and build it into a full rack. So we decided to do that with our collegiate rack, which is our most popular rack. And the more that we've been messing around with it, the more uses that we can see for this. The one question that I know will be tossed out is, why not just use the full rack for what you're going to demonstrate? I'll explain that as I go through some of the exercises, and you'll see why. With isometric work, or static work, or quasi-isometric work, the one thing that needs to be remembered is, for your body to actually function and to develop strength, or if it's through rehabilitation or sport training, function, or whatever it is, you first need to be able to stabilize. Second, you need to be able to absorb force. Third, you need to be able to produce force. A lot of the problems that we see with strength athletes and sports athletics with the training today is everybody's jumping straight to produce force. That's why you see so many people advocating and going back to body weight movements, free weight movements, and more structured gym class movements, because those are no longer being taught in schools the way they used to before. So by the time the high school coaches or the strength coaches or Division I coaches or trainers actually see the athletes, they don't have the stability that they should have developed, nor do they have the ability to absorb force. They're just thrown in the weight room to produce force, which is what all the movements are, bench press, squats, and so forth. What this is going to do and what this allows to do is not so much the stability, that's a whole separate concept, but it's going to be able to teach the athletes to absorb force through the static, isometric, and quasi-isometric work. One example, very fast, we have very short pins, rod and pipes on this rack. This is to absorb shock. If all we went with was the regular pin, what you would run into is any type of pin press, pin pull, you run the risk of bending this pin. This is what used to happen years ago with racks. If this pin gets bent in this rack, you're never going to get the pin out. You're going to have to cut it out. So when we take a pipe and we put it over the rod, now what happens is the force will be absorbed through here, saving the rod and also saving your bars. Because this is shorter, these are a lot quicker release. And we will build a playlist out of this, because I don't really like demonstrating movements as much as I like showing them actually being done and training the way that they're supposed to be done. So I'm going to rip through a bunch of movements, but then watch over time. This will have a playlist, and it will build a number of exercises in it for you to be able to see. The first exercise is just a basic pin pull, a deadlift from pins, here to here. I mean, everybody knows, everybody can already do that with the racks that you have. This can actually go down 2 more pins, so it will be, I believe, 3-4 inches off the floor. I got it at mid-shin right now. Now the difference with the isometric rack here is, now if we want, let's say that all I wanted to do was to work the hamstring region without any lower back. Without doing isometric work. I just want to do a partial range of motion. Now I have a start and stop point here to where my hips trash right now and my lower back's trash right now. So by keeping this out of the low end and out of the top end, I'm avoiding the stress on my lower back. I'm also avoiding the stress on my hip. So I can keep all the weight and stress on my hamstrings and not have to guess like many would if you just stepped back and had to go from here to here. So it's just a marker for an advanced lifter that's not going to really make that much difference. But if you have a kid or somebody you're working with as a trainer, they don't have those markers. They're not as in tune with their bodies as what the advanced lifter is. So by having this, they'll have that start-stop point. The other thing that you can do here is a straight isometric. Which isometric strength and isometric movements will work the strength of the movement within 10 to 15 degrees. So you'd have to work multiple ranges of motion to be able to get any benefit from it. But 15 degrees is a lot, and you don't need to train every single degree, every single workout. So basically you would go from a mid-shin, or you could go from the floor if you wanted to. Pull in, pull as hard as you can, 3 to 4 seconds, drop. 1 rep's enough. Because of the hole spacing, we can hit, there's 33 different holes. So you can hit pretty much every range of motion that you wanted to be able to cover every spectrum of the lift. The other cool thing that you can do with this would be to actually load the weight with, if you wanted a max lift. You know, if I could do a pin pull of 600 pounds, I load it to 600 pounds, or that'd probably be a bad number, say 550, something in the 90% range around there. Pull in and then hold and then drop. That gives you more of a quasi-isometric type movement. It's not totally that, but it's close enough. Another thing that we found that you can do, and this is with any exercise, I'm just demonstrating the pin pull, is you can go, say 2 reps in, pull, and then hit a full rep. That's something you're not going to be able to do with the full power rack. If you don't want to pull, you can have your training partners pull. Same thing can be done with the bench, squat, overhead press, or whatever it is. But to be able to go from a static down and then into a full, that's practiced a lot in rehabilitation as far as isometric strength and iso holds. You'll go down and you'll hold an iso hold for anywhere between 15, 90 seconds, depends on the coach, depends on the problem, depends on what you're trying to develop. And then after you do the iso hold, actually doing 1 rep. This allows you to do this in more compound movements like the deadlift. Another thing that can be done using the J hooks is we left enough room that you can still use the J hooks if you wanted to. So if you want to do a bent over row, back, step, row, here, and then put it back in. Probably not the best example. A better example would be the other day we did inclines. Took the bar out, incline press, and rack it again. Usually you're not going to walk out a deadlift, but one thing that you can do that I did not demonstrate is a top-down deadlift, to where you would set the pins here, start your deadlift at this point, have your training partners pull the pins, down, up, then you could walk it back in. The problem with a lot of top-down deadlifts, if you go out of the rack, you can always start out of the rack, but then you got to walk it out, and that's the problem. Then you're down and back up, and then if you end up dropping it, you got to unload all of it to put it back in the rack. By having it start on a pin here, you know, partners pull down, up, then you don't have to worry about that. You just step right back in. Finally, another reason for the rack is what I call stripping the rack. John Meadows likes to call it cage presses. Another way to look at it would be a meathead Smith machine, or as I would call, instead of being a three-dimensional lift, you know, Smith machine and other exercises are really working just on one dimension. By doing cage work or strip work, you're actually working in 2 dimensions. By that, going back to the stiff leg deadlift an example, I'd start either on the J hooks or the pins. I come against the rack. Then as I go down, I keep it against the rack the whole entire time. And as I come up, I pull into the rack as I come up. So my force is going backwards as well as up. So this is actually good for teaching proper deadlift technique, because it is going to teach somebody to pull backwards. It's also good for pretty much any movement. If you want to do the bent over rows, which didn't really work out before when I tried to demonstrate it, but if you want to go against the rack here, you try to strip the paint off the rack as you pull. You still got to balance left to right when you do this, but you have the stability here. This works really well going from a pin, which would be set here, and then up for shoulder work. Yesterday we did this for incline barbell presses. It was awesome. We set the J hooks here, took it out, fell the bar, let the bar fall against the front pin, down and up. And the goal with this is try to strip the paint off of the front post. And you can see just from one day, we already got a good start. This is what you call using your equipment and abusing your equipment. This is what this is for. It's to strip the rack. The reason for this post being where it is and why I advocate using this post to do all the stripping work is I'm just as anal with my equipment as most people are. I don't want people to see this all tore up. So for many of you, you really can't see that the paint's being stripped off of this unless you actually walk up and see. It is powder coated, it's texture coated, but it's still, if you're doing things right, you still should be able to tear the paint off of it. It's just the way it's supposed to be. If it doesn't look that way, then you're not working on it. Okay, a couple more features that I forgot is we did lower this brace here, so you can deadlift from the rack with the plates on the floor. Most other racks really aren't going to allow that because you're going to end up hitting the brace before that happens and still be about an inch off. This allows you to go all the way down, which is one benefit. The other benefit is we do have a post out front here, and the reason for this post is to weight the rack down. We do understand that you're going to have weights on the back of your rack, if it's a collegiate rack for the weight storage. That keeps from the rack moving around. Once again, we always have to say it's the safest thing to do is to always bolt down your rack. So we advise that. But by having this out front, you can drop a 150 pound or 200 pound dumbbell on it. So if you are really cranking into the pins as hard as you can, there's no way this is going to come off of the floor. You got an 850 pound rack, the weight's on the back, and then you do have counterbalance weights here as well. We decided to not go with band pegs in this because most of the time with such a short space, it's going to work better to actually loop the bands over the top and over the bottom to get the tension that you want.